hearing what you have to say.
Good morning, Jan. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, this is one of those conversations that we have in tab boards that go beyond just day-to-day operations. The whole purpose of being together in a peer group is to spend some time away from operations to look over the horizon and see where the company's going and where the world is going. And I think people find this presentation interesting. I started researching it back in 2007, and I wrote the first article on it for the San Antonio Business Journal back then. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, I became more and more fascinated by the power of demographics and what the entrepreneurial boomer generation is going to look like as we leave our businesses. I'm going to start out, if everybody has their mouse handy, we're going to ask you a question in just a couple of minutes. Who was born before this event? The atomic test and the dropping of the first bomb on Hiroshima in 1945. And I'd like to know who among you were born after this event. Makes some of us feel old. When the 4 mop tops landed at Idlewild Airport. Notice there weren't any jetways then. And first played in New York City on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1965. So there's a quiz popping up, and if you would quickly just click when you were born, it'll give us a good idea of who's on the seminar and where your orientation is. Oh, look at that. The boomers are coming up fast. Great. Well, like most of my audiences, we are predominantly boomers. So if you don't mind, those of you born before and after the baby boom, I'm going to refer to us as us and we and use the first person plural because I'm a boomer as well. This is a fact-based presentation. This is not opinion. I have a few opinion slides at the end of what I think is going to happen, but everything until the very end of the presentation is absolutely grounded in numbers. Peter Drucker said, I don't predict the future, I just look at what has already happened and determine the inevitable consequences. This is the truth. It's not a shading of the truth, it's simply what is going to go on. There are the numbers. According to the SBA, right now there are 28 million small businesses in the United States. 17 million of those are home-based or internet-based and have 0 or 1 employee. So among employers, the 9 million employers, about 3.5 million are younger than 48 or over 68 years old. That leaves 5.5 million baby boomers. We own 60% of all the small businesses in the United States, even though we're only 25% of the population. And although some of it is clearly the age we are at the moment, a lot of it has to do with how we were driven to entrepreneurism. Here's the slide of the birth rate. In 1945, you can see, I'm going to practice with this little arrow here. You can see in 1945, GIs returned from World War II, the immediate spike, quickly up by 1954 to 4 million births a year. This is in a country that only had about 140 million people or so. And by 1965, 78 million people had been born, 78 new American citizens. You see the tag on the bottom there. By 1965, 40% of all Americans were under 21 years old. Today, we would consider that the population profile of a developing nation. We were a very young country. 2 out of every 5 people were children. Business owners are boomers. We have a disproportionate number of businesses, and we are the largest generation in history, depending upon how you count the millennials. We have $10 trillion to transfer. And the big question is, who are we going to transfer this to? Who is going to buy your business? It could be this fellow. If he's working in your company, I apologize. And I feel badly for you, because if this is your succession plan, we're in big trouble. Boomers drive trends. Boomers are a homogeneous unit for the first time in American history. And that's because of television. We all experienced the same things at the same time. By 1953, we had color television coming into homes. It existed before then, but because of the World War II, we didn't have a whole lot of production capability to make it. Once we started bringing the price down with economies of scale, people started moving into television quickly. And what that did was it gave Madison Avenue a national group to market to on television. Before that, you sold to young people through their parents and regionally or ethnically. So you sold to Southern kids through Southern parents, and you sold to New England kids through New England parents. When television came along, you were able to reach the entire generation at once. Everybody started eating in front of the television. It kind of killed homemade meals. And Walt Disney was one of the first geniuses to figure this out. In 1955, he simultaneously opened Disneyland and produced the Mickey Mouse Club on television. One of the first shows focused on kids and that sold to kids. And if you want to understand the impact of the Mickey Mouse Club, by the late 1950s, everybody wanted a pair of Mouseketeer ears. We all remember those. They still sell them in the parks. You couldn't get on the internet and order them. There were no 800 numbers. You couldn't use a credit card. Most of us didn't have credit cards in the late 1950s. If you wanted a pair of Mouseketeer ears, you put money, either cash, a check, or postage stamps. The boomers in the audience will probably remember from the back of cereal boxes that postage stamps from the U.S. Post Office used to be considered legal currency. And you mailed them to Anaheim, California, and you said, please send me a pair of Mouseketeer ears for my child. With those obstacles, or what we would consider today to be obstacles to selling, Disney was shipping 25,000 pairs of Mouseketeer ears a day for almost 5 years. Phenomenal. If you hooked into the boomers, you made fortunes. We started developing toys for boomer kids. Boys got dolls. Don't know how that worked out yet. And girls got something cool. They got Barbie. In about 1956, Mattel released Barbie, and Barbie was unique. Prior to Barbie, all dolls were baby dolls. They existed solely for the purpose of training young women to be mommies. You could feed them, you could diaper them, you could give them a bottle. Some of them cried. They had like a little cat toy inside of them. But they couldn't be anything but a baby. With Barbie, girls' fantasy role play became anything they wanted to be. We started out with homemaker Barbie and hipster Barbie, then quickly moved into secretary Barbie, office worker Barbie, executive Barbie. There's even a president Barbie, Dr. Barbie, lawyer Barbie. But there's one excuse me. There's one version of Barbie that has never existed. And Jan, since you're the only one with a live line, I'll ask you, do you know what the version of Barbie is that never existed?
No, I would take a guess. What, business owner Barbie?
Nope. Mommy
no?
Barbie.
Mommy Barbie.
There has never been a mommy Barbie. If you wanted to fantasy role play with Barbie, you could be anything you wanted except a mommy. I think that was interesting as the boomers became childbearing age. So, we have all these new consumers in society, and a rising tide lifts all boats. We were building houses, we were building highways, we were building cars. It's a huge economic push, and it's an economic push that for a number of reasons carried the United States economy to the greatest prosperity for the next 45 to 50 years that it's ever seen. You need new citizens to work and consume. Now, there's a question here. I'm not going to make it audience participation, but which 4 European economies have the lowest birth rate over the last 30 years? The 4 sick men of Europe: Italy, Portugal, Spain, and Greece. They have the lowest birth rates over the last 30 years. Their economies are in dire shape, not particularly because they were mismanaged, although that is certainly some of the case, but because they don't have workers and they don't have consumers in the pipeline. They have an aging population that's not consuming. Demographics impact economies in dramatic ways. So today, if you're selling a small business, early boomers are selling to later boomers. Our 67 and 68-year-old boomers are selling to 48 and 49-year-old boomers. That's okay. We have some commonality. But tomorrow, later boomers will be selling to Generation X, and it's starting right now. And Generation X is a very different group, as is Generation Y, the millennials. So let's talk a little more fun nostalgia here. Boomers as teenagers. Now, when you're a teenager, you think things happen quickly. But actually, in the 1960s, when the boomers were reaching their teens, things were happening quickly. The top left picture, as I'm sure most of us know, is the Cleaver family, Leave It to Beaver. The bottom right-hand picture is Star Trek, which we consider to be the first of the wave of science fiction and high tech that lasts through today with CGI. The Cleaver family, Leave It to Beaver, was canceled just 3 years before Star Trek premiered. Television was changing very, very quickly. We look at those two shows like they were from different eons, but they were actually only 3 years apart. What the boomers wanted on television, they got, because they were the consuming audience. So, Flip Wilson, the first African American to have his own show, the Smothers Brothers, Archie Bunker, Bill Cosby, the first black action hero, although we remember him from his comedy. And Archie Bunker and the Smothers Brothers, among others, brought politics into mainstream television because boomer teens wanted to see politics. They were more politically aware. Again, the Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, things that involved the boomers and what was going on nationally. They didn't live in that bubble anymore. They were watching TV every night. So politics became part of variety shows, and political satire became part of comedy all over television. Red Skelton did not do political satire. Milton Berle did not do political satire. That was a boomer phenomenon. Then the boomers went to college. In 1965, boomers started turning 21. Within the next 10 years, there was a 150% increase in annual college graduations. And that number, like many of the other curves we'll see on these charts, is flat today. The number of people graduating from college rose from 6% in the World War II generation to 25% in the boomer generation, and is about 27% today. And the numbers remain very close to the same. It's a one-time shift. Things happening quickly? Absolutely. 4 years from when we orbited the first Gemini mission, we landed on the moon. 5 years from when the Beatles climbed down that staircase off an airplane in New York to go on Ed Sullivan, 5 years later, we had 500,000 people at Yasgur's farm watching Jimi Hendrix do Voodoo Child. Big changes very quickly, all driven by this massive pig in the python generation as they aged. So, what drives boomers? Scarcity. There was never enough of anything for the boomers. There weren't enough classrooms. I talked to many people, especially if you come from the more densely populated East Coast cities, who were on double sessions in elementary school. One set of kids went in the morning, one set of kids went in the afternoon so that they could get more use out of the classroom space. 40, 50, 60 kids in a classroom. I talked to a woman from Brooklyn a couple months ago at one of these presentations who had triple sessions. The kids went from like 6:30 to 10, 10:30 to 1, and 1:30 to 4 or something like that, so that they could get triple use out of it. So boomers became the workaholic generation because everything was competitive. We were more educated, we were wealthier, we were better informed, and we all wanted the executive corner office. But there weren't enough corner offices for all of us. So what did we do? Well, first we were sidetracked a little bit by the Boomer War. And I only bring up Vietnam because it was the first and the last war to be broadcast into our television, on our televisions into our living rooms. We can remember Walter Cronkite getting on and reading the KIA and MIA lists every day from Vietnam. The media learned their lesson. That didn't work out well, and they don't do it anymore. National Public Radio did a great piece a couple months ago on the returning veterans from Afghanistan who are going back to their small towns in the Midwest, and people, good upstanding citizens, are coming up and saying, "Where have you been?" They say, "Well, I've been fighting in Afghanistan." And they're like quizzical. Are we still fighting there? It's just not a news item anymore. And we can talk all we want about embedded journalists, but they did not deliver the news in the way that our generation saw it. So, in the 1980s, the boomers become parents. They delay childbearing. It doesn't start in 1965. Every generation before them, as soon as they start turning about 20 years old, there's a bump in population. In 1965, there was a drop in birth rates. Part of that was thanks to the U.S. Congress, who in 1964 legalized birth control, and the boomers embraced that quite well. So we become boomer parents, and we generate and kill off trends just by being there, just by our numbers. You can see here, 1985, 1984, Chrysler Corporation created the minivan. And if you don't remember the great feature of the minivan, it wasn't sliding doors. They were already on cargo vans, and it wasn't the electric doors. They came later. But minivans had cup holders, and people went wild for cup holders because we were running our kids from soccer practice to karate practice to Sylvan learning and tutoring, and we were feeding them in the car, and we started feeding them in drive-thrus. So cup holders were a big deal. I remember distinctly I was in the German automotive business in the early 1990s, and I remember the president of BMW of North America in 1991 with typical Teutonic attitude doing a news conference, and they asked him about cup holders, and he looked disdainfully at the reporter, and he said, "We build automobiles for driving, not for eating." Well, by 1993 and 1994, Mercedes and BMW sales started to flag in the United States, and they did surveys of people who were buying other luxury automobiles instead. And you know what the survey showed? Cup holders. By 1995, BMW and Mercedes had put cup holders in. So here's the trend of the minivan sales as the boomers age and have children. Then all of a sudden, 2005, the youngest boomers are turning 40. So the boomers are between 40 and 60. Look what happens to minivan sales immediately after that. Now, some of that is because we were making enough money to move up to SUVs. Some of it was we decided minivans were no longer cool. But when the boomers move into something, it will be successful. When we move out of something, it will stop being successful. So the boomers are all chasing the corner office. By 1984, we have some new vocabulary, work-life balance, because we found out that the best way to raise our standard of living very quickly was to send mom out to work. She was ready. She had been playing with Barbie. She wasn't playing with those baby dolls. So we started sending women out to work, and we went from, it was about 18 million working women in the United States in 1950 to 68 million working women by 2000. Your economy does well when you pump in 50 million more workers that have never been productive in business before. Certainly I'm not going to get myself in trouble and argue that home-based moms aren't productive, but they weren't out learning salaries and paying taxes. So what do you do when you're striving for the corner office, but there's not enough corner office? You go into business. In 1975, the first boomers turned 30, and by 1986, business formations had jumped from just under 300,000 to over 700,000 a year. And that is another number that has stayed flat. In that time, we've grown from 240 million to, I think we're about 360 million now, 350 million in the United States, but we still only have 600,000 businesses a year, new business formations. It was a one-time shot. We needed businesses. We were educated, we were consumeristic, we wanted the McMansions, we wanted to move the exurbs, we wanted ranchettes, and we were willing to adjust. So boomers became defined by what they do and what they own. Later generations are not as involved with that. So how did we get into business? Part of it was business format franchising. In 1943, Frank Wright and Ray Allen at A&W, Howard Johnson, and Harlan Sanders at Kentucky Fried Chicken all just about simultaneously created the business model franchise. Before that, franchising like Singer Sewing Machines or Coca-Cola was really a geographic right to sell a product. With the business model franchising, we had a new proposition for the boomers. If you give us some money, and if you're willing to work very, very hard, no problem for the boomers, we will show you how to be a business owner and earn the kind of salary that you would have gotten had you been able to get into one of those corner offices. Boomers loved it. What a great idea. In 1950, we sold 200 franchises in the United States. In 1960, 700. In 1970, about 2,000. In 1975, about 3,000. Now, I stopped because the second half of this graph is going to years from decades. So you have 1970 to 75, we have a 50% increase, and look at the rest of this. 76, 77, 78, 79. By 1980, we're selling 22,000 franchises a year in the United States because we had the perfect market. We had young boomer parents that were too busy earning money to do all the things that their parents had done around the house. So we became the outsourced parents. Other trends, boomers want to live a very long time and then they want to die young. Think about the health and fitness industry in the United States, which is entirely a boomer phenomenon. Jane Fonda workout tape started in 1982. That's just as the boomers were beginning to go into their 40s. Vitamins, cosmetic surgery, gyms, athletic stores, sneakers. I mean, guys that made sneakers became billionaires. Of course, they're not sneakers anymore. They're running shoes. But all driven by the boomers. And we outsourced. We outsourced daycare. We outsourced tutoring. We outsourced chores. We outsourced maintenance. By the 1980s, America's economy was 70% services. That was not driven by the migration of manufacturing to China and India. That happened much later. That was in the 90s. We were already 70% services. And what were those services? Those services were boomers serving boomers. I'm too busy making money, so I will hire people to cut my lawn. I will hire people to tutor my kids. I will hire people to show my son how to throw a baseball. And who am I hiring? I'm hiring a boomer who's working 50 or 55 or 60 hours a week cutting lawns so that he can send his kids to tutoring and he can have his kids coached in baseball. And the guy that's running the baseball school is a boomer who's working 60 hours a week so that he can pay somebody to cut his lawn. This is a huge driver. Not only did we all start doing things for each other and build an entire economy around that, but we were all released, all the small business owners were released from wage and hour law. We were no longer confined by the 40-hour week. So if you take millions and millions of people and they all hold their hand up and volunteer to work 55 and 60-hour weeks, you've got a tremendous trickle down through the economy. So what happens next? So the boomers start turning 20, but they delay families. And the birth rate doesn't rise again until 1987, 22 years later, before it really starts to catch up to where it was before. This is Generation X. This is the trough that's entering prime business owning age right now. From 1945 to 65, boomers added 58% to the population. From 65 to 85, Gen X only added 28% to the population. They have much less impact. Labor force growth. In 85, the last boomers turned 20. By 2010, the first boomers were turning 65. Our labor force growth is now down to 0.25% a year, and it's projected to stay there for the next 50 years. I can tell you there's no economist that will fight the concept of immigration. Now, boomers, I know we're predominantly boomers out there. I've got another quiz coming up for you if you have your mouse in hand. How many of you have ever complained about the work ethic of younger people? Yes or no? Be honest. Oh, one person hasn't. Okay. Overwhelming. Oh, two people haven't. They're probably the two that were born after 1965. Show you that. I'll show you the results on this one. That's pretty definitive, I think. Okay, here's the problem. Gen X is now the prime buying group for small businesses. They don't want the businesses that the boomers built. I did this for Bernie Moskowitz and the TAB members in South Carolina about 2 years ago, and we had an unusual audience. It was about 50% Gen Xers. They were all business owners, but it was half and half. And in the middle of the presentation, I stopped and I said, boomers, just be quiet for a second. Gen Xers, do you want to know about, you're all entrepreneurs, do you want to know about a great opportunity where you can make lots and lots of money? Of course, they all said yes. I said, okay, here's what I need you to do. I need you to promise me that you'll work 50 to 55 hours a week for the next 20 years. And they all started laughing. I said, what are you laughing at? And they said, we're not going to do that. I said, I haven't even told you what the opportunity is yet. There's a lot of money. And they said, we don't care. We're not going to work those hours for the next 20 years. And then I turned to the boomers and said, how many of you have worked 50 hours a week or more for the last 20 years? Virtually every hand went up. We have built businesses based on a competitive boomer work ethic. And if you're going to spend your exit planning time looking for a Gen Xer or a millennial that will duplicate your work ethic, you're going to have a difficult search ahead of you. Because there are three factors: demographic, sociographic, and psychographic. I call it the tsunami. If you saw the movie Perfect Storm, the Clooney movie, where the three storms come together, we have three storms coming together right now. Sociographic. Corporate America understands this. Small business is slow to figure it out. Corporate America can look at the numbers and they realize what it means. So the trends you've seen in the last 10 to 15 years in corporate America, limited commitment to business, flexibility, sabbaticals, portable benefits, retirement funding, convenient technologies, telecommuting, job sharing, job swapping, hot desking, those are designed for the generation following the boomers. They're not worried about motivating the boomers with those things. We'll all sit at our desks in our cubicles and slave away, those of us that aren't business owners. But the next generation won't. And corporate America is recruiting. If you want to know why people like AT&T and other large corporations are offering these early buyouts, it's because they have to clear the boomers out of the way so that they have a generation of managers when we finally leave. Psychographic. My life outside of work defines me. The business is secondary. I don't mix job and family. My real life is my life outside of work, and money isn't that important. By the way, if you've forgotten from the beginning, boomers have $10 trillion to transfer, so I think that alleviates a lot of the pressure on the next generation. But this generation understands work-life balance. And they're not nuts, and they're not lazy. They have a different value system. And quite frankly, it's the value system of our parents and our grandparents. Those of us that grew up in the 50s and 60s remember Dad coming home at a reasonable hour, weekends in the backyard barbecuing with friends. We weren't running and chasing until we grew up and became adults. And they have different expectations. Boomers are driven by work. What I do is who I am. And we delay gratification. We all figure that at the end of the road, we're going to get everything we wanted. Generation X workers will average 7 career changes. They believe spend now because the future is uncertain. They've seen their boomer parents get laid off. And they have low equity. The prices will be high. Many of us have built small businesses that are quite lucrative, and we want to get a market-type multiple for them. But Gen X doesn't have the money to buy them, and they're not saving in the hope that they can buy our businesses one day. So we're going to have to figure out how to transfer these businesses to people who don't want to work 60-hour weeks and don't have a lot of money in their pocket. It's a challenge. Because here's the demographic part. You can see the drop starts in about 2017, 2018 is when, just as that boomer birth curve is climbing, 20 years later that Generation X curve is dropping. And they don't cross back until 2030, 2031. In this period, right in the center here, the number of retiring boomers outnumber Gen Xers reaching 45 years old by 4,000 a day. And it will happen every single day for the next 7 or 8 years. Now, Pricewaterhouse did a survey back in 2008. 85% of business owners said they planned to sell within the next 5 years. I understand John Warlaw was from the Sellability Index was on a couple weeks ago, and he asked that question, and most people said they planned to sell in the next 5 years. Well, when they drilled down, here's what Pricewaterhouse found. 85% of owners 60 or older plan to sell in the next 5 years. 85% of owners 65 or older plan to sell in the next 5 years. 85% of owners 70 or older plan to sell in the next 5 years. Here's a hint. This plan isn't working for everybody. All owners think they're going to sell in the next 5 years. So, sociographic, big business is going to outbid small business for top workers. If you're gung-ho, if you're a go-getter, if you don't mind a 60-hour week, there are plenty of corporations out looking for you, and they can wipe us out when it comes to benefits and perks. Psychographic, Generation X is more interested in security and having time to themselves. They're not that inclined towards entrepreneurship. And demographic, there are just a lot fewer people. Economic growth is going to be lower. I don't know if anybody saw the General Accounting Office projections that came out on Monday, but they're talking about long-term growth for the next 10 to 20 years. They had said it was going to be 2.4%, then they said 2.1, then they said 1.7. Now they're thinking 1.3. 1.3 is not a healthy, thriving economy. But the problem is we have a huge number of citizens, the boomers, who aren't that interested in spending anymore. So, how do you beat the boomer bust? You've got a seller's world with a flood of businesses coming to market. We've got 5.5 million baby boomer small business owners that need to plan for retirement. And most of their businesses are not suited to the buyers. In the buyer's world, they have many more alternatives. They have little or no savings, and they have a fairly low tolerance for risk. Well, one of the things that's going to happen is the boomer delayed gratification is going to be delayed a bit longer. Fortunately, we're healthy, healthier than anybody our age in prior generations. And we will put off retirement. A lot of us had our savings get smacked in the Great Recession. We're uncertain about what we want to do. A lot of us, if you read my book, Hunting in the Farmer's World, have real issues with not working. We don't know who we are if we can't identify with the business. And we have lifestyle motivations. We want income coming in. We don't want to be living off savings. And quite frankly, as much as we are vilified and will continue to be vilified by the younger generations for not getting out of the way, as far as the U.S. economy is concerned, the longer we work, the better off we are. The better off everyone is. Generation X is going to get squeezed because the boomers aren't getting out of the way, and the millennials, those born from 1980 or 82 on, have come out in a much tougher job market. We all know the unemployment numbers for recent college graduates are the worst that they've been in all of history, and the Generation Xers have never had that kind of pressure. Because there's so few of them, they've basically walked into an economy that just absorbed them without a blink. And they could find jobs and they could move forward. And now they're getting a rude awakening. As a business owner, think about it. If you've got, let's say you're in your late 60s, early 70s, and you're ready to exit, and you've got somebody in his early 50s, late 40s, who has cruised along and been a good employee and has done the job you asked, and you've got a younger person in his early to mid-30s who's been running and gunning and driving and shows all the ambition in the world, which one are you going to pick to replace you? I think the Gen Xers are going to get skipped, and the millennials are going to run them over. There'll be a new middle class. Smart franchisees like McDonald's are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to train managers and reacquire franchises because they understand that a business model of selling a small business to a boomer who will work 60 hours a week to keep it going is going to go away. There are other franchises out there, and I see their profiles, and they're still trying to sell to downsized execs in their late 50s or early 60s who are looking for a second career. And if mom opens the store and dad closes the store and they have a $400,000 investment, they can make $80,000 a year. Those are going away. Those buyers won't be there. And the franchisees that don't understand this and prepare to be an organization run with middle managers are going to have big problems. The scarcity of trades is another thing. I don't know if you know the numbers in Texas, nationwide, but the numbers in Texas, the average electrician is 56 years old, the average master plumber is 57 years old, and the average mason is 71 years old. We need more people in the trades. I know President Obama just said something about that last week, but it's going to be a long correction because they're all about to leave. I tell audiences, be ready for the day when your plumber is like your doctor, and everybody laughs, and they say, well, my plumber is like my doctor. He probably makes more than my doctor does. Yeah, but you don't have to wait like you have to wait for your doctor. I think the day is coming when you will call a plumber and say, a pipe broke in my house, and he will say, I'm sorry to hear that. Turn your water off, get a hotel room. I can be out there in 3 weeks. The echo boom, the millennials, 80 million, just about the exact same size as the boomers. And they will rise faster and farther because as they start maturing and hitting their most productive years in their 30s, the boomers will be leaving in droves, and there will be gaps all over. Early indicators are they don't have the sense of entitlement of Generation X, but they don't have the expectations of Generation X either. Gen X wants to have the boomer lifestyle and the millennial work style. The millennials are more than willing to work less and have less. That's obviously all these things, these generational characterizations are broad. I know slacker boomers and I know workaholic Gen Xers, but broadly speaking, these are the psychographic profiles of the generations. And we're about to go to war. The boomers have $10 trillion in total assets. If you look at the movie by P. Peterson, IOUSA, they're projecting that the Medicare cost for the boomers as they enter their final years is going to be somewhere in the $50 trillion range. We don't have the money. For the last 50 years, the boomers have funded a pay-as-you-go system that took care of the generations before them that didn't put anything into it and got what they needed out of it. Now the boomers are holding out their hands and it's time to collect, and there aren't enough people to keep funding it behind us. And we're already beginning to see in some of the demagoguery in politics, people appealing to younger people by saying you shouldn't be stuck with the bill. Okay, last survey. How do you plan on leaving your company? With what I've told you so far, don't worry, there's some good news coming. We're not leaving you on this depressing note. But right now, just off the top of your head, you don't have to commit to anything, but just how do you plan? Okay, this is interesting. Transfer to employees or family is actually the plurality of the answers. And I think those are good answers. I think you're going to have to cultivate your own succession plan. Sell to a third party is 1/3 of the answers, and that's the majority of answers I get when we ask out on the street. But I don't know that selling to a third party is that practical unless you have a business that is very competitive. I'll tell you what I mean by that. So you have 5 options. It's not all bad. You aren't doomed. The good news is if you're a boomer business owner, you were raised to be competitive, and the fact that everybody's going to be trying to do the same thing that you're doing isn't going to come as a surprise. Option 1, ignore it. Let it be a surprise. You can just wait until you have no choice. That's not the one I would choose. Option 2 is wait and watch. Just by attending this webinar today, you know what's coming. You will see it in the news. You will see stories like the magazine and television headlines I've been putting at the bottom of the screen. I'm sure you read them as we went through. You know, the downgrading of American debt, the demographic cliff, the deficits in Medicare. You know what's coming. It's like the interview I saw with a burglar once, and they said, do timers on lights really have an effect? And he said, yes. And they said, is it that hard to figure out? He said, no, it's not hard to figure out at all. He says, if I want to case a particular house, I can tell that the lights go on at 8 o'clock and go off at 11 o'clock. But the guy next door to him doesn't even have lights. So just by the fact that you know and you can watch market trends, we're seeing a lot of businesses come to market in the brokerage world right now from boomers who don't want to tough out another recession. The last one took it all out of them. They're saying, I'm back, I'm better, my sales are up, my profits are up, it's time to go. Planned liquidation. Closing down the company, and we had several people say they plan to close down the company, can be done in an orderly way, and if you made enough money over the years to fund your retirement, it's a perfectly legitimate way to go. The problem most boomers have is their personal identification with the company makes them consider closure a failure. It is not a failure if the company accomplished your personal vision. We talk about personal vision a lot in TAB. If your company got you to where you want to go, you have no reason to be embarrassed to shut it down when you're done with it. It doesn't have to live on and provide a legacy. If you take care of your employees and you take care of your customers, you can leave in good order and with your head held high. Preparing for a competitive sale. Those of you that want to sell to a third party, better be in position. You need to be prepared because the buyers will have lots and lots of choices. So being in the top quartile of your industry financial results, documenting your systems and processes, showing upward trends in revenue and profit, locking in post-sale management with stay-behind agreements. If you have key employees, are you sure they're not going to walk the second you sell the company? Because that will scare the daylights out of a buyer if you don't have some sort of lock-in on them. So you look at these things and you set up the company that somebody would want to buy because they'll be looking at a lot of them. And, you know, my friend Jim Blasingame, who does the Small Business Advocate radio show, has a new book out called The Age of the Customer. And it's a great premise. People coming to you to buy your company will probably know more about your industry than you do. I am dealing with buyers all the time who have done research on the internet, and they know the trends, they know the margins, they know who the biggest players are, they know what the competitive forces are in the industry, and half the time they're talking rings around the seller because all he knows is how to run his own little company. Choose or hire a successor. The largest number of you said you were thinking of doing that, either family or employees. There are ways to do that. I can tell you I loathe the idea of handing the company to employees, taking a note, and then hoping to God that they can run it well enough for enough years to make the payments on it. I think that's insane. And I don't want to be a partner in my company after I leave. But there are methodologies to prepare in advance. If you have 3 years, it's great. 5 years is better, where you can start transferring ownership to employees and put them in a position to qualify for SBA financing, and they can take you out on the day that you give up control. I like the idea of having an owner having control in his company until the last day, and I like the idea of he or she walking away with all the money in their pocket. I think that's the way to go, but it takes some time. Planning timelines. If you want to close down, expect it to be a year. Sell to a third party, 2 to 3 years to get your stuff in shape and together and out on the market. Developing an employee successor who is otherwise qualified, except for financing. I'm not worried if they have money. That can be worked around. 3 to 5 years. Child in the company, 3 to 5 years. Child not yet in the company, 5 to 7 years from his 25th or her 25th birthday. I can tell you I still have clients I work with who are in their 60s, who have children that are 12 and 13 and 14 years old, who say that their exit plan is to have the kid grow up and take over the company. It's not going to happen. You just got to do the numbers. So building a transition plan, internal to employees or family, external, a third-party sale, but it's got to be a business that Generation X will buy. It's the most important event of your lifetime when it comes to finances. It's probably the biggest single transaction of your life. You should really spend some time on it. So, this is fact. The thing about managers and franchisees was opinion. The thing about the political fight between generations coming up was opinion. The rest of it is just grounded in birth rates. I can't do anything about the birth rates of 65 years ago or 45 years ago or 25 years ago. And from 2018 to 2023, if the business brokerage industry triples its effectiveness and sells 3 times as many companies as it's selling today, we will still have 300 small businesses a day that will close for lack of a buyer. So get ready. And if you want to download a 48-page ebook that describes all this in detail, you can get it at John F. Deeney, Beating the Boomer Bust, and the password, little inside boomer joke for us, is Woodstock with a capital W, and that will lead you to the free download, and you're welcome to it. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?